enough to study something called legislative studies and practice. Sounds as exciting as it is. It was essentially a fancy way to say politics. During my time here, we spent 4 days a week interning up in Stormont. So as you can imagine, an event like Agreement 25 is a privilege for me to host. I just do want to mention my professor here at the time was the late, great Rick Wilford. Many of you will know, a legend here in Queen's. A really magnificent man, and we know just how much he would have loved to have been here today. I'm now a reporter for CNN in New York, and I have to say a lot of what I learned in Northern Ireland comes in very handy in the US today. There's no better place than Belfast to meet people from different backgrounds and see firsthand how they try and live and work together. The theme for today's conference is Renew, and we've an action-packed day ahead with fascinating speakers and sessions lined up, so I'll not delay any further and we will get things underway. To formally open today's proceedings, let's welcome to the stage President and Vice Chancellor of Queen's University Belfast, Professor Ian Greer.
Distinguished guests, colleagues, friends, it's a great privilege to offer you a very warm welcome this morning to Queen's University. We're really delighted to have so many distinguished guests, speakers and panellists visiting Queen's as we mark the 25th anniversary of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. Yesterday was the first day of our conference, Agreement 25, and we heard from many of those who'd played a key role in the peace talks 25 years ago. They talked in detail. They talked in detail about building bridges between governments, building peace across political parties, not least in Northern Ireland, and guaranteeing peace. One message was very clear indeed, that the agreement would not have been possible without collaboration, not just here in Northern Ireland, but across the globe. And at Queen's, collaboration is at the very heart of everything that we do. It's key to addressing challenges, whether they're local or global. Only by working together will we find solutions, lessons learned from the Belfast Good Friday Agreement development. At Queen's, we take great pride in our civic and social responsibility. We support social change and economic growth in the region, and we're proud that the university continues to offer a key platform for debate and discussion on important issues to help shape a better world for our society. Today, we've got the chance to hear the perspectives of political and international leaders, providing an opportunity for us to broaden our horizons and refocus as we explore some vitally important issues. We'll also have the opportunity to attend insightful panel sessions at the Senator George J. Mitchell Institute for Global Peace, Security and Justice. The Institute was launched in 2016, and it's been delivering substantial impact since then, through research, through education, and through civic engagement. It plays an important role in helping societies that are emerging from conflict, not just in the UK and Ireland, but right across the globe. One such example is Professor Michael Semple's research, which focuses on innovative approaches to peacemaking with militant Islamic movements in Afghanistan and South Asia. So lessons learned in Northern Ireland can truly have global impact. Now we have an important video message from United Nations Secretary-General António Guterres, and prior to his appointment as Secretary-General, he served as the UN High Commissioner for Refugees, giving him a very special insight into issues related to conflict. Let's now watch the video message.
Distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen, I send my warmest wishes on behalf of myself and the entire United Nations family to this conference and to all the events marking the 25th anniversary of the Belfast Agreement, also known as the Good Friday Agreement. I commend all the women and men from governments, political parties, civil society, religious institutions and more who devoted themselves to finding a pathway to peace. The women of Northern Ireland were trailblazers and visionaries who put gender equality and integrated social development at the heart of the agreement. I also recognize the important role of the international community. Sustained support from around the world, across decades and continents, helped the negotiators to stay the course despite pressure from all sides. Your joint achievement, the Good Friday or Belfast Agreement, is rightly celebrated and studied by other communities in the grip of conflict, because peace was far from inevitable. It was won through political and community courage, human ingenuity and imagination, painstaking negotiation and infinite patience. This agreement shows the importance of continued engagement and efforts even in the most adverse conditions. And as conflicts rage around the globe, including in Europe, we need the spirit of the Good Friday Agreement more than ever. Many of you at this conference have devoted yourselves to the service of peace by sharing your experiences and insights widely. For that, we thank you. But all of you know that peace does not depend on any single event, not even one as significant as the Belfast or Good Friday Agreement. It is up those who come afterwards to step up and write the next chapters, to turn an absence of conflict into sustainable peace, to remain vigilant in the face of continued risks, to take action against hate speech and promote social cohesion, and to transform a legacy of destruction and wasted potential into prosperity and sustainable inclusive development. That work continues today. Young people everywhere have the passion and vision to turn ideals into reality. And in Northern Ireland, young people have opportunities that they could only dream of 25 years ago. Today, we recognize and thank those who opened up those horizons, creating a brighter future for all the people of Northern Ireland and an inspiring example of peace for the world.
Thank you, Vice-Chancellor, and thanks to UN Secretary-General António Guterres. We have two great, distinguished keynote speakers this morning. The first, the Right Honourable Chris Heaton-Harris, MP. He has held a wide range of significant roles: Assistant Government Whip, Parliamentary Under-Secretary of State at the Department for Exiting the European Union, Parliamentary Secretary of the Treasury or Chief Whip, Minister of State at the Foreign, Commonwealth and Development Office, and Minister of State at the Department for Transport. Long list. And of course, he was appointed Secretary of State here in Northern Ireland on 6th of September 2022. So join me in welcoming the Minister to the stage.
Thank you very much indeed for that introduction. It was very long, wasn't it? I'm also a soccer referee, a parent of two delightful girls, and possibly the worst joke teller on the planet. Taoiseach, Mr. Commissioner, Your Excellencies, most distinguished guests, and of course, Chancellor Clinton, thank you for having me here today. The truly historic 25th anniversary of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement is an enormous achievement, and something that should be deservedly marked, recognised, and indeed celebrated. And I'm grateful to Vice-Chancellor Greer and his team for bringing us all together. So, Ian, thank you very much indeed. We heard yesterday that the agreement was the product of the vision, bravery, and leadership and imagination of many, many people, far more than I can name in these remarks. But it's right today that we recognise those whose efforts brought peace to this nation after decades of conflict. The success of the peace process will forever and justly be one of the proudest moments and most significant achievements of Tony Blair, Bertie Ahern, John Major, and Albert Reynolds. I will forever be struck by the foresight and leadership of Lord Trimble in pushing forward with the agreement in the face of significant scepticism and indeed outright opposition at times from parts of his own party and across unionism. Real leaders know when to say yes, and Lord Trimble and the Progressive Unionist Party's David Irvine led not only their own parties but unionism and loyalism in saying yes to peace. John and Pat Hume dedicated their lives to fighting for civil rights and reconciliation. Their passion for peaceful and democratic means of achieving change and their clear-eyed view of the impact of violence on vulnerable communities created a legacy that lives on to this day. Martin McGuinness, along with Jerry Adams, will be remembered for the courage and leadership they showed in persuading the Republican movement for peace. His partnership with Dr. Ian Paisley and his gracious engagement with Her late Majesty Queen Elizabeth were powerful symbols of how far Northern Ireland had come. I had the privilege of getting to know both John Hume and the Reverend Ian Paisley when I was elected to the European Parliament in 1999, and they both served. It's not often that a kind of new kid on the block in politics gets to sit in a parliament with a Nobel Peace Prize winner. And we remember the critical role that women played in getting us here. The late Mo Molan brought a humanity and a courage to her role that unlocked key elements of the agreement. Her decision to engage with loyalist prisoners in 1998, we heard yesterday, against advice, was key to securing the support of loyalist communities for peace. Within the Irish government, Liz O'Donnell played a critical role in the Department for Foreign Affairs, and women like Monica McWilliams, Pearl Sagar, and May Blood brought powerful leadership and perspective to the process. They focused minds on what was really at stake and worked tirelessly to ensure that the voices of women were heard in the peace talks. I also want to pay tribute to the US's contribution, particularly the personal commitment that we saw demonstrated yesterday with the President, Bill Clinton, and Secretary Clinton. Spend a few moments in their company and you can palpably feel their love for this place. And to the heroic work and patience of Senator Mitchell. His speech yesterday was probably one of the best I've ever heard, and I've heard a few political speeches in my time. I'm actually quite sure it will go down in history, and I'm also quite sure I'm going to plagiarize it ruthlessly. And what the contribution of the US endures today. We can tell that by what we've heard and seen at this conference. And it was demonstrated last week by President Biden on his visit. And the contribution, just as the contribution made by our friends in Canada, South Africa, and Finland in particular, due to the issue of decommissioning, still endures to this day. I was thinking yesterday when Senator Mitchell talked about the birth of his child and then the 61 other babies that were born on that day, that it is undoubtedly the case that the efforts of all these people to get peace mean there are men and women alive today, possibly here today, who otherwise might not be. And we must also never forget that beyond lives saved, something special comes with peace. Freedom. Pre the agreement, small, ordinary acts that so many of us take for granted today would then have been difficult or actually a cause for your concern, something your mother would have worried about. The freedom to stay in town after work for a pint with a friend, or to head out for a meal with your family at the weekend. The freedom to walk down the street without fear of being caught up in some sort of disturbance. The freedom, actually, for young people to grow up and live happy, successful lives here in Northern Ireland and not be forced to leave their home in order to know stability or security. It's a testament to the success of the agreement that so many here now can exercise these freedoms. Now, 25 years on, the UK government remains wholly committed to protecting and upholding the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. And I know this is a commitment that is shared by the Taoiseach and the Irish government. I, like and enjoy working with Miche very, very much. And the friendship and the cooperation between the UK and Irish government is vital to protecting and upholding the agreement. And I am determined, in my capacity as Secretary of State, to deepen and strengthen that vital relationship. The agreement's success can also be demonstrated by Northern Ireland emerging as a thriving centre of creativity, innovation and entrepreneurship. Its screen and film production industry has hosted some of the world's most talented actors. Queen's and Ulster University boast world-leading research and development activity, enabling Northern Ireland to capitalise on the technologies and sectors of tomorrow. And Northern Ireland has a burgeoning and justified reputation for its fintech and cyber security sectors. Together with over £600 million of UK government investment in the city and growth deals, Northern Ireland is increasingly a byword for an economy on the cutting edge of technology, connection, and innovation. But we must not sit back thinking the job is done. The abhorrent shooting of DCI John Caldwell, the disturbances over the Easter weekend, and the ongoing paramilitary activity in too many communities across this nation illustrate that a tiny minority seek to drag Northern Ireland back to its darkest days. But I know for every person who wants to drag Northern Ireland down, there are thousands determined to lift it up. To those who pursue violence, I'll say only this: you'll never succeed. It's hopeless. Not because I say so, though, or because the government says so, but because the wonderful, strong and proud people of Northern Ireland say so. They reject your violence, which has no place in this society, and that so many have strived, the peace that so many have strived so hard to create. Now, to safeguard this peace, we must be willing to confront the challenges as well as the successes. The agreement explicitly recognised the importance of acknowledging and addressing the suffering of the victims of the violence. A workable way forward on this highly complex and sensitive issue has eluded successive UK governments, Irish governments, and Northern Ireland executives for 25 years, despite valiant attempts by many. Satisfactorily addressing the past is an absolutely key element in realising Northern Ireland's potential in a prosperous, peaceful and shared future. And I'm determined to do so in a way that provides better outcomes for those most affected by the Troubles. And as we consider the challenges that still face us, I confess I've also been struck by a narrative that has become louder in recent years. A narrative that the agreement struck in 1998 did not achieve great things for unionism. That it was somehow all about wins for nationalism. That narrative is wrong. And all of us who support the agreement must be vocal in countering it. Today, the principle of consent is so often taken for granted, but it was an important and hard-won guarantee that settled Northern Ireland to remain as part of the United Kingdom. Before 1998, the Constitution of Ireland asserted that Northern Ireland formed part of an Irish national territory and that the Irish government had a right to exercise jurisdiction over that territory. 25 years ago, a minority, but a significant one, considered it legitimate to use force to bring about a united Ireland, contrary to the wishes of the people of Northern Ireland. The acceptance of this principle of consent, a fundamental part of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, changed all of that. Northern Ireland's status as an integral part of the United Kingdom was settled by the agreement. That status can't be changed by the evil deeds of terrorists, nor can it be changed by the words or wishes of politicians. The only thing The only thing that can change it is the will of the people of Northern Ireland. And the Irish Constitution was changed at that time to reflect this. And just as important for the Union, the agreement created the conditions, built the foundations for Northern Ireland to be a thriving, dynamic, successful society within the United Kingdom. The simple reality is that people tend to change the status quo only when the status quo is not working, or people simply stop making the case for it. Devolved power-sharing institutions created a status quo that those of us who value Northern Ireland's place in the Union can robustly and successfully promote and celebrate. So let no one tell you that power-sharing is in any way at odds with unionism. Instead, it is the surest way by which Northern Ireland's place in the Union can be secured. The people of Northern Ireland are rightly demanding better, more responsive public services, greater economic prosperity, and a brighter future for their children. The biggest threat to Northern Ireland's place in the Union is failing to deliver on these priorities. I make no apologies for being proud of Northern Ireland's place in the Union and for wanting it to continue. Others who share that view should put the Union first, restore the devolved institutions, and get on with the job of delivering for the people of Northern Ireland. Like David Trimble and David Irvine before in 1998 and Dr. Paisley in 2006, real leadership is about knowing when to say yes and having the courage to do so. I also know that the question of the agreement's potential evolution is being discussed and debated both here at this conference and more widely across Northern Ireland, as people rightly want to see devolution in their elected institutions up and running and want to make it work. I believe that successfully achieving local governments in this place has always depended on the consensus that I talked about earlier. And certainly, if there was voices from London or Dublin trying to impose something, it would certainly fail. But the UK government will continue to listen intently to the conversation on how we best achieve the effective and enduring operation of the institutions, because we too want to see the institutions working well for the whole of Northern Ireland. Their success is Northern Ireland's success, and Northern Ireland's success is the Union's success. Distinguished guests, Northern Ireland has made remarkable progress in the 25 years since the agreement's signing. If these 25 years have been about peace, then the next 25 must be about delivering a more prosperous, more reconciled future for everyone in Northern Ireland. We must look forward to what is possible, just as we must reflect and remind and educate ourselves about exactly what is at stake. The Government of the United Kingdom stands ready to support Northern Ireland to fully deliver on the ambition of the agreement, and I look forward to working with everyone here, everyone, everywhere, in making that an achievement we can all be proud of. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Secretary of State and distinguished soccer referee. Now, speaking of community relations, something extraordinary is about to happen. Me, a Kerry man, is about to introduce a Cork man to the stage. Micheál Martin, Taoiseach, Minister for Foreign Affairs and Minister for Defence, was appointed to his roles on December 17, 2022. Prior to this, he served as Taoiseach from June 2020 to December 2022 and has been the leader of Fianna Fáil, of the Fianna Fáil party since February 2011. He has held various cabinet offices and even served as a time for the Mayor of Cork, but we shall not hold that against him. Let's welcome Taoiseach Micheál Martin.
Vice-Chancellor, Professor Éaonn Greer, distinguished guests and friends, could I say at the outset, it has always been a great personal and political ambition of mine to be introduced to a distinguished gathering like this by a Kerryman. And it has been realised at last. I want to thank you, Professor Greer, and all at Queen's for the organisation of this conference, a centrepiece of the events to mark the anniversary of the Good Friday Agreement. And I'm delighted to share this stage with the Secretary of State for Northern Ireland, Chris Heaton-Harris. During this conference and in other events over recent weeks, we've had the opportunity to remember not just the remarkable achievement of the Good Friday Agreement, but also the different elements which came together to make it possible. One of the most important of these was the fact that governments in Dublin and London worked together with trust, cooperation and determination to overcome whatever obstacles emerged. This is as true today as it has ever been, which is why I value the warm, candid and constructive relationship that I've enjoyed with Chris since we took up our current roles. And indeed, he brings the firmness of an efficient soccer referee to bear at times as well. This anniversary of the agreement is a reminder that our shared responsibility, our role as co-guarantors, is not a matter of party, policy or preference. It is a solemn responsibility on our two governments, a treaty responsibility enshrined in the 1998 British-Irish Agreement. And it is a responsibility underpinned by the explicit democratic values and wishes of the people in both parts of this island. It is no secret that our two governments have not always acted in concert at all times in recent years. Even today, there are areas where we disagree fundamentally, such as the legacy bill. But I am delighted to say that our partnership is manifestly better now than it has been for quite some time. Of course, like everything else of value, it needs continued care, commitment, and investment. Friends, if we are truly to remember and honour the achievements of the agreement, then we must all be honest in assessing the work that is still to be done and the need for us to renew the spirit of dialogue which has been central to every advance from the earliest meetings 30 years ago up to today. And we must never lose sight of the fundamental principles of the agreement, which remain the foundations upon which peace and progress are built. Together, we agreed that all state action in Northern Ireland must be anchored in human rights, with the European Convention on Human Rights as the threshold. Together, we agreed on parity of esteem between communities and their aspirations. And together, we agreed the principle of consent. The principle of consent allows everyone in Northern Ireland the right to pursue their own vision for Northern Ireland's constitutional future, providing they can persuade others of their case. And in doing this, it creates the space for us to address other urgent social and economic challenges without every discussion being filtered through this one lens. The agreement states that the two governments will recognise the legitimacy of whatever choice is freely exercised by a majority of people of Northern Ireland, whether they prefer to continue to support the union with Great Britain or a sovereign united Ireland. As a constitutional Republican, I am free to pursue a united Ireland in the future, just as so many in this room, friends of mine among them, are free to make the case for Northern Ireland remaining within the Union. In the heated debates around Brexit in recent years, some protagonists sought to change or reframe the principle of consent. Perhaps the intention in the agreement got a little lost in those debates. The principle of consent was not new. even in 1998, having been seen in the Sunningdale Agreement, and it was central to the vital Downing Street Declaration in 1993. In the agreement itself, it was agreed as part of a wider set of balances. The referendums enshrine consent in the fundamental laws of Ireland and the United Kingdom. All of that is to say, because it still needs to be said, the principle of consent is both simple and inviolable. And while it is right that we take time to celebrate what has been achieved, we have much, much work to be finished. And part of this work relates to key elements of the agreements that have not been implemented, and part relates to our collective failure to build the reconciliation and prosperity which is the defining challenge that falls to us. Seamus Mallon wonderfully summed up the agreement as not a finish, but a new dispensation. And many of the opportunities opened have yet to be grasped. The Bill of Rights and civic forums promised as part of giving a voice and security to all remain unfulfilled commitments. The latter is all the more important when key institutions are so often in abeyance, held hostage to the demands of one side or the other at a given moment, all the while ignoring the demands of the public for better government. The calls for reform of the agreement, including the need to break the cycle of instability and suspension, have grown louder. It is clear that the political community between unionist and nationalist has grown, and I believe that there should be reform, but that is best achieved from a position of stability. We must get the Assembly and the Executive working, respecting the mandate of last May's election, then see what should and what can be changed. Friends, the agreement did not give victory or defeat to anyone. Instead, it gave a fresh start to a place ravaged by divisions and by violence. Since then, sadly, we've not gone anywhere near far enough in actively promoting reconciliation between communities. On the 10th of April 1998, the words of John Hume and David Trimble on this mirrored each other. John saying that we can begin to heal the deep divisions between our people, and David speaking of a great opportunity there to start a healing process here in Northern Ireland. The spirit that informed and enabled the agreement was a generous one. It was a willingness to step across our ancient boundaries. It was a willingness to actually engage with the perspective of those from a different background, to see the world and try to understand this place through their eyes. Yes, the healing has begun, but it remains very much a work in progress. The best way to honour those whose lives were lost or destroyed by the absence of agreement is to find once again, collectively, the spirit which made 1998 possible and apply it to the work of bringing communities together in 2023. This is a small island. Regardless of your constitutional preference, it is a shared space. The geography won't change, and there are things that it makes sense to do on an all-island basis. Thanks to the agreement, we already promote the island very successfully as a single tourism destination. We manage our inland waterways together, but there is more we can do. I launched the Shared Island Initiative over 2.5 years ago, anchored in the Good Friday Agreement, to look at other things we can do together, to create a space for dialogue, for understanding, and for tackling shared social and economic problems. My government is putting significant resources into the Shared Island Initiative, €1 billion up to the end of this decade. We're supporting major capital projects focused on bringing people together from the Ulster Canal to Narrowwater Bridge. We are supporting civic society organisations that work on an all-island basis. We are conducting unprecedented levels of research into the reality of life across our island to understand what are the similarities and differences north and south in terms of education, health services, competitiveness, biodiversity, and a whole range of issues, while also funding new and exciting research collaborations between institutions on a cross-border basis. We are prompting and hosting new conversations through our Shared Island Dialogue series about what does it mean to share this island. More than 2,500 people and organisations have engaged in this process so far, challenging assumptions and already sparking the establishment of a series of spin-off initiatives, including a new All-Island Women's Forum and a new network on climate change and biodiversity loss. Without prejudicing any constitutional positions, all of this is helping us to know each other better and to find ways that, working together, we can help communities to benefit from sustained economic and social progress. Education has always been my great passion. It is the great enabler. The Shared Island research that I've mentioned has shown us that Northern Ireland has fallen behind in some areas of education, and perhaps most crucially in the area of school completion. Surely this is one area where it makes sense for us to do more together. And in addition, what can we do to advance the provision of integrated education? Chris and I attended a wonderful event 2 weeks ago, celebrating progress to date, but very conscious of the need to do more. What can we in the Republic do in terms of applying lessons from programmes which have secured one of Europe's highest school completion rates? And with targeted investment, along with the United Kingdom government and working with the Northern Ireland Executive, to make sure that more young people complete their education and get to enjoy all the lifetime of benefits that come with that. Friends, on normal days, these university halls are populated by students who have had that chance. Young men and women preparing for their future with confidence and ambition. For many, 25 years is more than a lifetime ago, and the Good Friday Agreement is a historical text. It may frame the immediate world around them, but they have current hopes and needs. We are not here for the past, but for the future, their future. In the agreement, the parties reaffirm their total and absolute commitment to exclusively democratic and peaceful means of resolving differences on political issues. Of course, this is taken to mean a commitment to non-violence, taking the gun out of politics. And on the 4th anniversary of the murder of Leary McKee, and so soon after the attempted murder of DCI Caldwell, that is a fundamental principle we need to continually reassert. But there is a further element to it. Committing to democratic means comes with a basic and inherent responsibility: the responsibility to accept democratic outcomes. If politicians seek leadership positions through elections, they must honour the trust placed in them by delivering that leadership. And in Northern Ireland, through the type of interlocking institutions we agreed in 1998 and endorsed in subsequent agreements, including St Andrews, that leadership must be exercised in the best interests of everyone who calls Northern Ireland home, whether they are British or Irish or both, or increasingly those at the heart of our communities who are neither British nor Irish. The past few years, with the practicalities of Brexit, have been turbulent for Northern Ireland and for these islands. The European Commission and the United Kingdom government stretched themselves in recent months to reach an accommodation that works for Northern Ireland. I know that turbulence will take some time to settle, that parties need to pause and reflect internally on next steps. But I urge all elected representatives to take their seats in the Assembly and the Executive and get to work on the questions of everyday life that matter to the people of Northern Ireland, including healthcare, education, policing, regional imbalances, and much, much more. Northern Ireland is a place transformed since 1998, but there is much work to do. As an Irish government, we will play our part. Chris and Prime Minister Sunak have shown that the British government will play its part. I know that our international supporters, who contributed so much to making peace possible, will stay the course. As we heard with such passion last week from President Biden, the United States remains the steadfast ally of all in Northern Ireland who seek to secure peace and prosperity. And our European Union colleagues, delighted that Maros Sefcovic is with us this morning, they're continuing to support our collective endeavours. But the essential next step is for the politicians of Northern Ireland to assume their responsibilities, fill the roles and institutions created by the Good Friday Agreement, all of them, and get to work to secure the futures of the young people of Northern Ireland and the generations to follow. Let us recapture and renew that generous spirit of the agreement. Let's make the effort again to see this place and see what has happened through the eyes of those we don't agree with. When we do, I am certain that we will recognise the potential of the opportunity before us, the potential of a decade of investment and renewal, the potential of our young people when they are given an education and the chance to thrive, potential that we dare not squander. Thank you very, very much indeed.
Thank you, Taoiseach. Fantastic to hear those different but complementary perspectives. So now we will move on to our first panel of the day. It's called The Parties. In a moment, I will invite the panel to the stage, led by the chair, journalist and broadcaster Mark Simpson, who covered the Belfast or Good Friday Agreement for the BBC in 1998. Mark will be joined on the panel by Doug Beattie, MLA, leader of the Ulster Unionist Party, Mary Lou MacDonald, leader of Sinn Féin, Colm Eastwood, MP and leader of the SDLP Party, Naomi Long, MLA, leader of the Alliance Party, and Emma Pengelly, MLA, representing the DUP. So please now, everybody, join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning to everyone watching online, and good morning to the panel.
Good morning.
Only 30 days until the next election in Northern Ireland. You're busy, so thank you for joining us. We're going to talk about the current issues, and those two thought-provoking speeches have given me plenty of material, lots of questions to ask, but it's called Agreement 25, so we want just to spend a minute each just telling us a little bit about the 1990s, starting with you, Mary Lou MacDonald. Where were you in the
Where were you?
Where were you?
Can you account for your whereabouts? So, I was thinking about this. I have like almost like a collage of recollections just of that time. My first, and maybe my strongest, is 1994. 31st of August, I'm walking down Henry Street in Dublin city centre, the greatest city in the world, as you know, Mark.
Controversial.
I have a thing which would be news to younger people here, a Sony Walkman.
I remember those.
I'm of that era. And the news of the ceasefire. And from there on in, it's like the nation kind of skipped a beat, held its breath. And then I have a whole collection of memories of long hours, glimpses through windows, people negotiating, Gerry Adams and Mark McGuinness in lockstep, on very long walks, Liz O'Donnell tearful and emotional, Bono finally holding Trimble's and Hume's hands aloft in a kind of rock and roll moment. So all of that, but there is absolutely no doubt that that moment, I was a graduate student at that time, and at that moment, it was transformational for all of us, whether we realised it in that moment or not. And for me, it represented the moment where I decided that I would be active, that
Really?
I would be an activist, yeah. So for me personally, it was a very formative moment.
And Colin Eastwood, you were probably in short trousers because you were only 14.
He's only a baby.
I have about 2 weeks left to my 40th birthday, so I'm milking that. But yes, I was 14. I remember sitting up all night watching on Holy Thursday and the Good Friday watching.
BBC or RTE?
BBC, of course. And the national broadcaster, you can guess which one it was. I remember saying that to Mark Durkin one time. You know, I sat up all night watching. I thought, funny, we sat up all night too. Yeah, and actually I got involved in the SDLP just after that to get involved in the campaign for Good Friday Agreement, because the SDLP ran a very strong Yes campaign, and I got involved. I remember going out canvassing and seeing Pat Hume and Mark Durkin and John Hume, and it was just, you know, mesmerising, really. And the sense of hope as a young teenager, given all that we'd been through, was immense, and you did feel a great pull to get involved and to do your bit. And I felt that this was a moment where we could begin to do things differently, and we could democratically bring about the kind of Ireland that we wanted to see. It has been a long slog, I think, this last 25 years, and we have had, you know, amazing change. We're not there yet, though, I don't think. We're nowhere near where we want to be, and it can be frustrating. But I think our generation are saying, that's wonderful, thank you very much. What's next?
We're going to talk about that.
Yeah.
We're going to talk about that. Naomi Long, you were politically active, weren't you, in 1998?
I was in 1998, actually because of 1994, so it's interesting kind of Mary Lou referencing that, because I was actually a student at Queen's in 1994, and I had just graduated from Queen's, and I was making...
In this hall?
In this hall, walked across this stage. I think that might have been the last time I walked across this stage. And I had just graduated with an engineering degree, and I was making the decision, I suppose, that a lot of young people were making, which is whether we would stay in Northern Ireland or go away and get a job somewhere else. And one of the things that influenced my decision was those ceasefires in 1994, because for the first time in my life, there was some hope that things were going to change. And I had never experienced that. I was born at the end of 1971, so my entire life was just, the backdrop was the Troubles. And so in 1995, I joined Alliance. I was canvassed, which we're doing a lot of now, and I joined the party, but I never thought I would be involved in politics. And the things I remember, you know, I remember the Clintons at the light switch on at City Hall. I remember the buzz around that. I remember a lot of change actually happening at council level. You know, Alban McGuinness became the first nationalist Lord Mayor of the city. And I remember all those kind of momentous changes that were happening, where suddenly you felt that there were possibilities that maybe we didn't think existed before. And in 1998, just watching on television why the whole thing unfolded, people that at that stage I kind of knew, like John Alderdice and others, and just watching that all unfold on the screen, and the sense that there was some kind of hope, not a kind of naive hope, because I knew it was going to be difficult, and even the agreement had difficult parts of it, but just that belief that somehow things could be better. And you know, I ended up in politics. I never intended to. I was quite reluctant as a politician, but I still am. But I kind of chart, I suppose, my move from engineering into politics from that moment, when I just felt inspired to want to make change, because such a massive opportunity and such an optimistic time. And I wish we could recapture some of that courage, because I don't think you really have any hope or optimism unless you also have that courage.
We'll come back to that. Emma Little Pengelly, I think you were another teenager in April 1998.
I was indeed, and I suppose my experience is very different, I suppose, from others on the panel. You know, I was a teenager growing up in Market Hill, and for those who don't know Market Hill, it's a strongly unionist town in the outskirts of South Armagh. And we had had a very, very difficult 1990s. There'd been a number of huge bombs in our town, which caused significant damage and entirely flattened the centre of our town and damaged many hundreds of houses in the early 90s. The last of those attacks were actually in September of 1997 during the cross-party talks, which then led to the agreement. It was a strongly unionist town. There was a very, very strong opposition to the principle of negotiating with terrorists, I suppose is the way it would be described at that time. It was a community that had suffered a huge amount during the Troubles, and I think there was a very, I'm always at pains to emphasise this, those who opposed the agreement were not opposed to peace. The vast, vast majority of those people strongly disagreed with paramilitary violence, terrorism. They felt there was always an alternative. There was never any justification. But they felt that the balance in this was wrong. The idea that in order to get peace, in order not to be killed by your neighbours, you would have to negotiate and offer bribes or goodies or some form of a concession to get that deal. So it was a very different context. I'm saying that because that was my lived experience. That's where, what my neighbours, my friends, I was still at school. I was hoping to come up to university in September.
Were you able to vote?
I was able to vote in the referendum, but it was my first election that I voted in.
Okay.
And, obviously, again, like so many others on the panel, it was a hugely politicised time. And, the one thing that really struck me about that time, and I did engage heavily in politics beyond that when I came up to Queen's, was this idea that we had these very strong, genuine feelings, but nobody was listening to that. Okay. And I suppose a bit like our current context, it was almost as if it was an inconvenience, something to be ignored. And I think that gave me an absolute drive to make sure that, I, in my role, can stand up and talk and articulate the genuine concerns of the people that we represent.
Thank you, Emma. Doug Beattie, you were a soldier rather than a politician.
I was, and Mark, I was serving overseas, so I never got any of the buzz that people were feeling in Northern Ireland. All my recollections were conversations with my father. My father was also a soldier, having served in the Ulster Rifles, the Royal Irish Rangers, and later years in the Ulster Defence Regiment. So it was conversations I was having with him, which was telling me what was going on, and he was following it quite deeply and sort of telling me where we are. And I remember when he said, look, they've come up with a deal, and having a conversation with him and him saying to me, there's things about this deal I just do not like. I do not like parts of this deal because our family were touched by terrorism. My mother's younger brother was murdered in 1975, one of those forgotten victims of nearly 3,500 of those killed. So the thoughts of Uncle Samuel's murders being released from prison was a real drama for our family, and it was something we looked deeply into and had to really scrutinise. But I remember saying to my dad, Dad, what are we going to do? And he says, do you know what, Doug, we must give this a chance. We cannot keep going the way we are going now. We cannot go back to keep killing each other again. We have to move forward, and therefore we have to vote yes. And I have to say, from that day to this, I thank my father for giving me the reason to vote the right way, and it was the right way.
Thank you, Doug. Okay, we've dealt with the past. We're going to talk about the present and the future. Mary Lou MacDonald, back to you. We were backstage, but I think I heard the Tánaiste talking about reform, getting the institutions back. But don't be scared, don't be squeamish about reforming this agreement, which was signed almost to the day 25 years ago. What do you think?
So I think the first order of business is to get the institutions back up and running. I mean, that is the first responsibility that we have. I mean, for me, we were here yesterday. We heard extraordinary words from Senator Mitchell, from President Clinton, from Tony Blair, from Bertie Ahern, and from others. And the challenge now has really crystallised for all of us, because there's a retrospective piece acknowledging the spirit of 1998. But the real challenge for us now is, what do we do next? And the first order of business next is that the North needs a functioning government. We need the North-South bodies up and running. We need the East-West relationship put back on a sustainable footing. So a conversation about reform, of course, 25 years in, who could object to that? We certainly don't. But the first thing we need to do is to demonstrate again that we understand the absolute primacy of sharing power. That's the issue here, that we share power. And the evidence has to, in that has to be almost a year on from the Assembly election, that Michelle O'Neill takes position that the executive is formed and that you have an executive and a government that can work in the interest of everybody, because I am so conscious that as time ticks away, we are missing precious opportunities. And I don't think that we can collectively defend that, nor should we try. So we need government up and running, and that means we need a decision from all political leaders that, again, we will work together, we will share power, we will have our differences, and God knows those are well rehearsed and well defined. But we have to have the common platforms now. I mean, Naomi talked about in her time making that decision, do I stay or do I go? We have incredible people, especially our young people, right across this island. They may go, and more power to them. They should always have the option to come back home. That's the critical bit. So that's what we need to measure up to now. So,
and sorry to interrupt, but if Naomi says when I ask her about reform, we need to change the voting system in the Assembly, what is Sinn Féin saying?
I have said to Naomi, and we've said many, many times, let's sit down and let's discuss all of it. Let's have a look and see how everything works. But sacrosanct has to be the sharing of power, parity of esteem, the human rights and civic protections for people, which aren't concessions to any of us. They are absolutely every citizen's entitlement. But the discussion about reform, let's have it. But firstly, we need to get the show back on the road, and we need to do it very quickly.
Well, I agree the priority has to be having government for the people of Northern Ireland, because, I mean, I've said it many times, we can walk and chew gum, we can do government and solve problems at the same time. It shouldn't be the case that when we hit a roadblock politically, that we have to end our government and then go off and have a series of negotiations about that one problem and then come back to government again. That is no way to run a country. And so we've got to get over that, that veto politics that we have, that ransom politics. And I want to get back in, so we have never made negotiations around change precondition. But at heart, when I studied at Queen's, I studied engineering, and I believe that when you look at a problem, it shouldn't just be to analyse it and think about it and talk about it and debate it, it should be to fix it. And I've looked at the institutions, and they've been tested beyond destruction at this point. We know,
to destruction?
Well, absolutely, and we know that they don't function well. When one party can pull down the government at will, at any time, that is not a stable way to do government. It's not a way to do business.
The principle... At the risk of trying to make a cheap headline here, tell us exactly what you want.
Well, what I want is stable government. I want what was, but I want, this is important, I want what was promised in Strand 1. Strand 1 promised that we would govern Northern Ireland together well, and we haven't done that to the best of our ability. And the institutions, it's not just about lack of goodwill, the institutions have been an impediment to it. So I'll give you some things I want. I want all parties to be in government. I want them to have the right to be in government based on their mandate, which is in the Good Friday Agreement. But I want us to accept that if one party doesn't want to be in government, they should be allowed to walk away. SDLP have done it, Alliance have done it, Ulster Unionists have done it, but the two main parties can't do it. And I think that's wrong. I think if the two main parties, if either of them don't want to be, that's fine. I've seen the transformation in Northern Ireland that the Good Friday Agreement has brought. The success of Alliance, I think, is testament to the fact that our society has transformed beyond recognition. But our votes count for less in that assembly than everyone else's on this platform. My vote does not count equally with everyone else. If we're going to talk about human rights and equality, protections for minority, I have a right to ask as a politician with 17 MLAs and a constituency, where are our protections and our equality? Because none of us are equal unless all of us are. So we can make simple changes like weighted majority voting instead of parallel consent that actually enhance the incentives for cooperation and protect those of us who actually want to be part of that collaboration. I think the Good Friday Agreement was a triumph of negotiation, of patience, of statecraft, of all the things that you need to be able to bring peace. And I think the fact it has endured, albeit falteringly, for 25 years is a remarkable achievement. But it is a foundation on which we should be ready to build. It should not be the ceiling of our ambitions for this place. And I want to aspire to better than simply two communities trying to find accommodation. I want to recognise that Northern Ireland is a changed place, that we are one community with many different identities, many different priorities, and we need to work together.
Colm Eastwood, you would have heard Stephen Grimison, my former colleague at the BBC, say that the peace process had plenty of builders but only one architect, and that was John Hume. Sadly, he's no longer with us. Do you think he would be squeamish if he were here about changing strand one of the agreement?
No, I think John was always somebody who was forward-looking, not backward-looking. But he would also remind us that there are three strands in the Good Friday Agreement. Absolutely. And yes, we should look at reform. I think Mary Lou's right, we need a government first and foremost, and the reform conversation probably needs to be a longer form conversation. But in the rush, frankly, to bring the DUP on board in a lot of this over the last couple of years, strand two's been neglected. The concerns of the rest of us have been neglected. Another key foundation stone of the Good Friday Agreement is the principle of consent. And I've heard over the last while some mutterings around changing and tinkering with that. I just want to say, and I listened to the Secretary of State intently, I want to just make it very clear to the British government that any messing with that would be a fundamental problem for a lot of us. So I just think we talk a lot about the balance of this thing. It has to be balanced, but we have to remember the core principles. They're there for a reason. But look, we're up for the discussion around reform. We put proposals down before, but I just think we also have to remember it almost doesn't matter what the institutions look like if we're not prepared to work together. If we're not prepared to remember, as John would have said, we've got to work on our substantial common interest all the time. And you know, there's only so many institutional fixes to bad attitudes.
Thank you. Emma Little-Pengelly, you can maybe guess where I'm going next. Speaking of Chris Heaton-Harris's speech, he made it very clear that he thinks it's time to get back into the institutions. What are you saying today?
Well, look, I would say I often reflect upon my past, not because we need to be caught in the past or dominated by the past, but because we need to learn from the past and reflect on the past. And the one thing that we know about Northern Ireland is what hasn't worked over the years, what didn't work before the negotiations to the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. And that was the politics of exclusion. It was the politics of demeaning or dismissing the genuinely held views of a significant community here in Northern Ireland. It is the politics of denying opportunity and the roles and the aspirations and the fears of people here in Northern Ireland. That doesn't work. You know, everybody in this room is sitting here marking the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. What does that mean? What are the principles of that agreement? They're the principles of inclusion. It is the principles that nationalists and unionists and everybody in between should work together. And I cannot say this more clearly. You will not exclude your way out of this issue. What has happened, and the reason we don't have the institutions, is for a number of years, it was repeatedly said that there was deeply and genuinely held concerns because of the guarantees of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement outlined in Annex A, paragraph 1, that Northern Ireland in its entirety was to remain in the United Kingdom until such point as the people in a referendum voted otherwise. And people felt very strongly that the protocol damaged that guarantee, it wasn't just a promise, it was a constitutional guarantee that opened up the way for unionists and nationalists to come into government together. And what we've heard repeatedly, including, I have to say, at times in this conference, is a demeaning and dismissing of that. Like what we heard from the stage yesterday is this: it doesn't matter if you agree with those grievances. They exist. They're real. they're genuine. If they had been listened to 2 years ago, the institutions would not have collapsed. If the promises made to unionism in Northern Ireland had been fulfilled, the institutions would not have collapsed. I do want there to be hope. We need there to be hope. I want to build a better future for Northern Ireland. That can only happen with inclusion and consensus, and us working together and listening to each other, even if we don't agree with where we are coming from.
You were here yesterday. Did you hear Senator George Mitchell talking about the 100%ers? Those people that it's not an inch, we're not going to move, we're not going to compromise on anything. The perception is that you have a lot of 100%ers within the DUP.
No, but I think that you have to again learn from our history. Why did the institutions not work just after the Belfast Good Friday Agreement until St Andrews? They didn't work because decommissioning hadn't been resolved. Prisoners were being released, and yet decommissioning, not a single bomb or gun had been handed in or handed back. And therefore, that destabilised the institutions. These issues can destabilise. If we look back in recent times, those big issues have destabilised institutions. Therefore, they can't be ignored. Ignoring these issues will not lead to stability. And therefore, we have to get round a table, discuss this, find a way of agreeing better, find a way of listening to each other, not allowing these grievances to rumble and get to the point where it causes a collapse, because we all want Northern Ireland institutions to work better. I've been involved in the institution since 2007, and the longest period of stability was under the DUP and Sinn Féin from 2007 until 2017. That's 10 years, and it isn't easy. It's compromise. It's talking about all these policy initiatives. It's finding a way through by working together. We need to get back at that, not shouting at each other and demeaning and calling our genuine grievances manufactured. That doesn't work. And those are not the principles of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. So if you're here and you're celebrating or you're marking the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, get back to those principles. Be authentic and follow those through, because that is the solution to our current impasse at the moment.
Thank you. Doug Beattie, what would you say to Emma Little-Pengelly?
Look, I'll say to everybody, look, the Belfast Agreement was the unbalancing, it was the balancing of the unbalanceable. You know, it did take compromise from everybody. Not everybody got exactly what they wanted in 1998, and it was designed to be changed. And it will be changed, I'm in no doubt whatsoever. And it has been changed, I have to say, already. But we fought the last election in May on a system of government that we were going to employ. Sinn Féin became the largest party. If they are not allowed to take their place, and if we're not allowed to get a government up and running now, then we really are trampling all over democracy here in Northern Ireland. I say that, Mark, as a unionist, as a whole UK unionist. What happens in Scotland, what happens in Wales, what happens in England is as important to me as what happens here in Northern Ireland. We are a collection of nations which makes the union go forward. Therefore, if any part of that nation is damaged, is weak, then the whole nation is damaged and weak. And right now, Northern Ireland is damaged because we have no government. The people are suffering. They are suffering today as we speak here, and they're going to continue to suffer until we get government up and running again. So it's simple. You cannot exclude any corner of society. You simply cannot. If you're going to change the Belfast Good Friday Agreement in any shape or form, then fine. But let's get government up and running first. Let's get it stabilised. Let's get agreement. And then let's look to see how we can all come together and look to see what are the best changes that need to take place. And I absolutely accept what Naomi has said, and she makes some absolutely valid points. But we can't do it now where we are. We need stable foundations initially, and then we need to go forward.
And I don't disagree with... I don't disagree with what Doug says, but folks, this is not my first rodeo. I have lived through 3 major suspensions of the institutions, and the truth is, if we get it up and running again, which I hope we do in short term, there's no guarantee that it will survive, because the institutions are not just fragile but unstable. And as an engineer, I want to make sure that when we get this back up and running, it is stable. Because the worst thing that we have is this stop-go government where people's aspirations are lifted, where there's optimism, where there's hope, and then within months it crashes again and people feel, you know, I think people now feel quite jaded and cynical about the Good Friday Agreement, and I think that is a tragedy because it is one of the most enduring peace agreements anywhere in the world, and we should be proud of it and we should take care of it. But if we do not deal with the fundamental instabilities, it will wither away, and support for it will wither away through frustration and cynicism. And that, to me, would be a scandalous waste of an opportunity for all of us. The problem, of course, is, and I say this gently to governments who are listening, when there isn't a crisis in Northern Ireland, nobody's interested. And I thought it was interesting what some of the contributors said yesterday. Actually, delivery is the time when we need your support. The talking we can do, but the heavy lifting of delivery is where we need the support. And I hope that if we do get the Assembly up and running again soon, that governments don't then walk away from the conversation about reform, don't walk away from the delivery. That needs to happen.
So yeah, I think that is a really important point, Naomi, that there is a consistent and a deeper interest from both governments. I think if we're to be frank, that slipped. I think that's dangerous, and I think we need to reset all of that. I also want to agree with Emma. I mean, none of us have any right whatsoever to disregard the views, the fears, the anxieties of the other. So I want to say to you, you have been heard. You have been heard so loudly. As a matter of fact, your concerns were taken so seriously that we have had years of a sustained negotiation. Michel Barnier from the European side, then Maros Sefcovic, the British government. It was an imperfect dialogue at times. I won't go into all of that, but it got to an end point. So the negotiating parties have now said, we have concluded on these matters, necessary protections and access to the European market, which, by the way, is to everybody's advantage. So the question now has to be, particularly for the DUP, you now arrive at a crossroads and a moment of decision. And I sincerely say to you, I really pray that that decision is the right decision, because it seems to me unconscionable that we stay in this limbo and that we drift. For me, the most frightening prospect is drift. We agree that we have to work together. We all live here. That's not going to change. That will never change. We have different views. That's not going to change either. What has to change now is that we have the institutions, as imperfect as they are, functioning for everybody. And we're all out and about now canvassing for elections, and I'm in and out of this place a long time, and I listen to a lot of voices. The common thing that I hear, again, particularly from our young, to the political class, is get your act together and give us governance.
Colin, I will bring you in, just because that was addressed directly to Emma. I'll bring her back in, and sorry, Colin.
But again, I think this comes back to learning from our very recent past on this, because I was there, working within government in the 2 years that the institutions were back up. We articulated these issues to some of the people sitting in this room, and they were not taken seriously. In fact, many of the parties stood up and said that the concerns were manufactured, and they weren't. And the reality is, if we are to make, and I agree actually with everybody on the panel that has said, we need the institutions to work and to work better. But that will only happen if we actually listen to each other. And there has been a failure of that over the last couple of years. Sir Geoffrey Donaldson warned numerous times that this was coming. We could take action to avoid it, and yet that didn't happen. And the reality is, sometimes, as hard as it may be, it is the right thing to say, no, this is not fair. We need to get this fixed for good reason. Because as Naomi has said, unless we get the foundations right, If we rush back into the Assembly without getting the foundations right and addressing these issues, then there's only going to be a collapse again, potentially, in the short to medium term. We need to avoid that. We need to build the strong foundations to make the institutions work, not just this year, in the next 5 years, but for the next 25 years.
Well, Emma talks about the reality. The reality is our waiting lists would embarrass a third world country. That's the reality. We also now have an agreement between the European Commission and the British government that's been completed. It's done. It's been voted on by the British Parliament in huge numbers, and a decision has to be made by the DUP. That's also the reality. What we also see is that agreement allows us to trade into both markets. I have friends in England and Scotland who would kill for that opportunity, yet we're looking the gift horse in the mouth. We were all in America a couple of weeks ago. We've had more Americans and presidents and former presidents in Belfast this last couple of days than there is in Washington. All here telling us they want to help. We've Joe Kennedy in Derry the other day, a place that's been left behind actually by this peace process in terms of economic opportunity. They want to help. They want to help bring jobs because, as John Hume used to say, again, the best peace process is a job. That's the reality. And Emma talks about exclusion. The only people excluding the DUP are the DUP themselves. You have to opt in. So we've heard the concerns. We've listened to them. We could hear little else, frankly, over the last couple of years. But I think the deal is now done, and you've got to make a call. You've got to get back in and deal with the health service and deal with the fact that still lots, despite we're celebrating the Good Friday Agreement, we still have thousands of young people emigrating. They're the things that get me out of bed in the morning. I think that's what we should all be focused on.
Well, I think I'm the only person that was actually there on Good Friday in April 1998 in the snow outside Castle buildings.
I was watching you.
You were watching, he was watching the BBC. And I was a skeptic. I didn't think there would be a deal, if I'm honest, typical cynical journalist. But I could see the momentum when everyone was in that same building. I'm not joking. Castle Buildings is still available. I see we have General John de Chastelain here.
No way. That's a red line.
No, genuinely, would there be some merit? You know, when the British and Irish governments are here, Colin, do you think there is some merit after the election, maybe bringing people together and getting some sort of concentrated process?
I don't know what we discuss is the problem. I mean, like, I'm all up for that, and we'll talk to anybody anytime, anywhere, but I genuinely don't know what we discuss, because this was an agreement between the British government and the European Commission. The negotiation is already over. It's finished. You know, there's nothing left to discuss. There's no more unpicking this. I think everybody's been clear about that, and it's important that the EUP hear that. No matter how long they hang out, there's no more changes to be made to that international trading agreement. Can we discuss the future of power sharing and institutions? Of course, but that should go alongside a reformed and re-established executive tomorrow morning.
I suppose, I mean, I want to turn into George Mitchell here, but I suppose the answer to that would be what he proved was you bring people together and you talk about what you can agree on, and you might be talking about Naomi's huge shopping list of issues.
Not that long.
Yeah, but it's not in our gift, is the point, Mark.
Yeah.
These issues that the DUP are concerned about, you know, are not in the gift of any of the rest of us. It's between the British government and the European Commission, and it's done. That's the point.
And the big danger here is that danger of drift. I mean, how long is a piece of string? I mean, we can navel gaze from here to kingdom come. That's not worth anything to people out there.
But
frankly,
you could talk about Strand 1 and the point that Emma Little-Pengelly made about, you know, what's the point of going back if you have all these unexploded problems which could come up and bite you?
But Mark, listen, I think there's one thing that we can agree with, just to strike a kind of an optimistic note for the audience. We can all agree, because we have all said to the British government, I'm not sure if Chris Heaton-Harris is still here, that
Steve Baker's still here.
Excellent, that's even better.
That's him in trouble now.
In the NIL now.
You're trying to ruin this man's career.
Sorry, I do not wish to ruin your career. There is a financial issue in terms of the funding of this place, and we all know we need reform, modernisation. Ultimately, The Irish economy needs to stand on its own 2 feet and can. But for now, the subvention has been whittled away and cut. We have a very serious issue around resourcing, not least in the area of health. And I think we can all collectively say from this platform, there is a financial ask. So open up your checkbook and assist the executive when it's up and running, because the biggest, issue to explode will be an expectation, having had no government. The average person will say, well, get back to work, get things sorted. What about the waiting list? What about education? And by the way, as we're speaking here and as the drift happens, European funding has now ceased for many, many, many community projects, including things like rural transport, women's organisations, community organisations. So the idea that we would go into conclave and that we would wait for, white smoke, that we've looked into our souls and we're ready to go back to work, to me, I have to say, is profoundly unacceptable. And I really think that there is a fundamental difficulty with that, and we shouldn't imagine that the public of all political stripes will be endlessly patient with that position, nor should they be, in my view.
I think there's undoubtedly a huge amount of work to be done. Anybody who is engaged with our public services know that we have to have a very ambitious agenda for reform. And I absolutely agree, that takes finances. We do spend more money, but we spend more money because we are trying to work a system that needs fundamental reform in terms of education, in terms of health. There's a huge amount to talk about around that. We need to get it right. We need to build the confidence with the public. But in truth, in terms of the current situation, that ball is in the court of the United Kingdom government. It has to be about fulfilling the promise and the constitutional guarantees of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. That requires the UK government to ensure Northern Ireland's place within the Union is secured and the problems over the last number of years have been addressed. There is a pathway there. There are discussions, and I want to reassure everybody in this room, the DUP is a party of devolution. We want to get devolution back, and we want to make each of the departments work. We want our citizens to be happy, to be healthy, and to be able to live fulfilled lives here in Northern Ireland. There are pathways to do that. But anybody working in any of the departments or agencies, we know that requires investment. It requires consensus, it requires talking, and it requires getting this right, because we owe that to the next generations.
What is meant, though, by the constitutional guarantees and the place in the UK being secured? Because the Good Friday Agreement that I support, it's very clear, and this hasn't changed, because if it's changed, I missed the victory party. But the people of Northern Ireland, the people of the Republic of Ireland, in concurrent referenda, decide what happens.
Because
it's a UK, a United Ireland. That is the only basis on which we decide our constitutional future. It means that I have to do some work to convince people that it's a good idea to change the constitutional position. But it hasn't changed. I hear this from the DUP. I sit behind them in the House of Commons, and I hear this all the time about the constitutional position has changed. When did that happen?
Well, it happened when the internal market of the United Kingdom was fractured. It happened when there were barriers being built internal to the United Kingdom. And the reality of it is this, right? I understand that Colin doesn't understand or see why, as a unionist, you may be concerned about what has happened over the last number of years.
Would you not
but
think
again,
about that when you voted for Brexit?
It comes back to the fundamental point about understanding each other and understanding the grievances and concerns of each other. And I understand absolutely your position. But I am saying
Mark,
that these are genuinely held
but
concerns.
you got to understand.
That's fine.
Order. John Allardyce, we need you. We need you back. We need to come back. I think you're, in a way, making my point. Yep. Because I'm wondering, should you be having these conversations more? And Naomi Long, just to move it on a little bit, do you think it is putting the cart before the horse, having all these talks about reform first?
No, I mean, that's not the plan. Just to be absolutely clear, Alliance hasn't made reform a precondition of going back into the executive and into government, but we are making it an absolute condition of the Good Friday Agreement surviving, because that's what the evidence tells us. But I just want to say a couple of things. First of all, I want to shout out something good about Castle Buildings, because I was in it for 2.5 years as Justice Minister, just down the corridor from Robin Swan, who was our Health Minister, and a lot of good things were done in that building, and the conference room where the Good Friday Agreement was agreed is still available, and I'm sure they would be more than happy to lend it to us if we needed to have more discussions. Look, there can never be too many conversations, but we can't talk in the absence of progress. We could have these discussions about how we provide reassurance to Emma, about how we provide reassurance to those in the community who are unhappy, about how we move Northern Ireland forward in terms of reforming our institutions. I mean, I see Jane Brady here in the audience. And
the head of the Northern Ireland Civil
Service.
Head
of Northern Ireland Civil Service, who has been bringing the party leaders together to discuss how we need to reform our institutions. We have been putting papers to the UK government in terms of how we reform our public service
So it's
delivery.
happening already?
We're already doing those things. We've put papers to the UK government about the need for, I guess, an invest for reform scheme, so that we don't just give more money in the block grant to continue doing what doesn't work, but actually invest in reform that will deliver better public services. Those are the conversations we absolutely should be having. But we can have those and government. That's how the rest of the world works. There is nowhere else in the world where people say, we need to change how we pay for our water services. Let's stop doing everything else and walk out of government until we solve that.
Okay.
And can I, one other, just very brief. I want to reassure Emma, I do understand why unionism is uncomfortable with the protocol and with the Windsor framework, but I can't understand how you did not see this coming with Brexit. And that's where I'm lost. This is, and I'm not saying that to make a cheap political point.
You are saying that to make a cheap
I am not,
political
Emma,
point.
because at the time we warned that Brexit would send shockwaves through what was a very delicate ecology here in Northern Ireland in terms of our politics. And we were told that it was Project Fear, that we were naysayers, that we couldn't see the potential.
With the greatest respect.
And to be honest,
the
all I'm asking is that you
decision-
acknowledge
but
the damage that's been done and work with others to fix it, rather than say
Very
the
quickly.
ball is in
We
someone
are going
else's
over old
court.
ground here.
But look, the Brexit decision was a decision of the United Kingdom. It has happened. We need to move on and try to address the issues. We have to move on. But the reality of it is this, right? The reality of it is this. The DUP went back into government for 2 years and tried to get this resolved in parallel. We genuinely did that. We genuinely made representations. But the reality is that we need to have a fair deal. We need to address the issues of unionism. Anybody in this hall who thinks it's easy to say, no, we need to get this right, in the face of presidents and prime ministers and pressure and the scoffing and mocking of the DUP, I would say this. In terms of this room doesn't represent the voters that are out there. The voters that are out there speak to us on the doors all of the time. They're articulating their concerns. I am not here to bow to presidents and prime ministers. I am here to speak for the people and their genuine concerns and to try to get that resolved. We didn't have to be here. If these issues had been addressed, we would have avoided the collapse of the Assembly. In those 2 years, we wouldn't have been in this position. Now let's get it back. We can only get it back if we get this right and we sort out the issues.
Thank you, Emma Little-Pengelly. We've talked about the past, we'll talk about the present. We're now going to just finish the last 10 minutes and talk about the future. Doug Beattie, what would it be, 2047? Where will Northern Ireland be in 2047 in another 25 years?
Tell you what, I'll not be in politics, that's for sure.
Have we put you off today?
You haven't, but it's a long one. Look, I have to be really honest. And look, I put my cards on the table. I am a unionist. I want to make the United Kingdom work. I want a new Northern Ireland. That's what I want to drive forward. And I look and I see people in my society who want a united Ireland. It's a fair aspiration. I have no issue with that fair aspiration, as long as they understand my fair aspiration is for a united kingdom. That's the way it works. And we can have respectful discussions around that in whatever shape or form we want. And I think we need more engagement, not less. Because engagement creates relationships. And good, strong relationships, whether it's the people on this platform here, or whether it's between the UK and the EU, or the UK and Ireland, or the UK, the United States and the EU and everybody else. Relationships is what's absolutely key. So to get to the point of the question that you've asked me, what do I genuinely think? I genuinely believe that Northern Ireland will be a stronger, more forward, more progressive, more confident place within the United Kingdom in the next 25 years. I think the people want that. I think the people are striving for that. I think they're looking for leadership. They're looking for somebody to stand up and stop giving them pessimism and negativity. I think they want people to stand up and give them optimism and a reason to get up in the morning and feel fulfilled at the end of the day when they go back to bed. So I think we're on a cusp of getting that. And all we need to do is grasp that opportunity. And the Windsor Framework, if I can, Mark, the Windsor Framework is not the starting point that I would have went for, but it's what we have now. So what you have to do is you have to grasp the opportunities of the Windsor Framework. And then you have to work on the challenges that are contained within it. But you can do neither unless you have government. And if we have government, we secure Northern Ireland's place in the United Kingdom. I genuinely believe that. I genuinely want that. And I will work in that field, but respecting everybody else that I work with.
Thank you.
So I believe that we will be changed and changed utterly in 25 years' time. I believe that we can have, that we should have, and that we need to work for an Ireland that is prosperous and leads the way in so many different parts of life, economically, in terms of the green economy, in terms of research and development. I mean, I want us to have an Ireland that really, really appreciates and really values the immense resources that we enjoy as an island people. I believe that we will have an Ireland that is united within the next 25 years. In fact, I don't think it's going to take 25 years. I think that process is going to be exciting and challenging. I think that process will absolutely demand, as Doug has said, those very respectful, open conversations and engagement. And as we have the Taoiseach in the front row of this gathering, it's my strong view that we need the conversation now about what orderly, peaceful, democratic constitutional change looks like, how it's sequenced, what it feels like, what are the aspirations of all of our people. Give people the opportunity to engage, to come, to say their piece. And I include in that our citizens who are unionists, who are British in a partitioned Ireland, who would be British in a united Ireland, to have their say. Those for whom a united Ireland is not their first option, those who will actually campaign and vote against it, equally need to have a stake in what can be the most incredible opportunity for this incredible Ireland. I don't think we could overstate what we can achieve in the next 25 years if we're united, if we have common purpose, if we have patience, if we have respect for each other, if we honour still the fundamental pillars of the Good Friday Agreement, but say there is no limit to where we can go, or to our ambitions.
Would you still have some sort of devolved structure at Stormont within that New Ireland?
I think we need to discuss that. Would that feature as a transitional element? Would it be a permanent fixture? I want us to talk about that. What I know is absolutely bolted down, and I want to say this, is the fundamental issue of identity. You know, Irish, British, or both. That matter is comprehensively resolved by the Good Friday Agreement. And very often when you visit schools and you talk to younger people who come from a unionist or a loyalist background, one of the things that they ask is, well, what about me? I mean, I'm British. What about my passport? What about the monarchy? What about all of those matters, as far as I am concerned, are resolved matters. British people are British. I have no ambition to challenge that, much less change it. So the question will arise for the British government, what's the democratic space in Britain, in the context of a reunited Ireland inside the European Union, what's the space that will be made to recognise that identity? These are complex conversations, they're very important conversations, we need to have them, and we need to know that as a small island nation, now strategically placed in the world's geopolitics, we need to say what are the biggest goals and the biggest ambitions that we can realise together. And I have a very strong sense that our people are up for that, north and south, east and west.
Very, very quickly, so if I had a grandchild or a great-grandchild in these new Irish structures and he, she, or they decided they wanted a British passport, they could within that new all-Ireland structure?
Absolutely. I think that has to be crystal clear. And what we need is an absolute assurance from the British system that that would be accommodated, because that would be a call for them.
Chris Heaton-Harris is in the audience. Maybe ask him on Red Lines or The View some night. Colm Eastwood, 2047.
Well, despite my grumpiness about the current situation, I'm actually very optimistic. I'm very hopeful for the future. I think we'll be living in an Ireland that's new and united, where every part of the island has full access to the economy, where every child has full access to the services that they need to meet their full opportunity with their God-given talents. I think we can be living in a reconciled country as well. But I would just say we shouldn't be waiting to get to that be the final point. I think the process of developing a new Ireland should be a process of reconciliation. And that will take people like myself and Mary Lou to do an awful lot of the heavy lifting. You know, the British tradition has to be protected within this new structure that I think we're going to have. And that will challenge Dublin, it'll challenge Southern society, but it's really important that we do it. Frankly, the Ireland that I want to see, well, it won't be worth having if people who are British don't feel part of it. But I also think that we should, at that point, hopefully we're doing more celebrating positivity and positive things that have happened rather than commemorating some of the ugliness of the past all the time.
Well, I'll be 80 by then, so you may need a new panel chair. Naomi Long, you'll be a lot younger than that.
A little. And I hope I'm a bit like Doug. I hope I'm retired somewhere and watching it from afar, which would be a nice, relaxing brief to have. But look, whether it's a United Kingdom that our future lies, or whether it's in a United Ireland, what my focus is in the here and now, and that's the only bit I can control, is trying to build a united community here so that we can actually function as a society. There are huge parts of the Good Friday Agreement that have not been fulfilled, huge promises made, whether it's to the victims of the Troubles and their right to dignity and to truth and to justice, whether it is about how we have participative democracy and engage our citizens more actively in the choices and decisions we make, whether it's about how we as a community recognise that whilst there are two main traditions on this island, there are many other new traditions that have been brought to this island by people who have chosen to make it their home and have a vested interest in how successful our future is going to be. And we need to find ways of better integrating our society, whether that's our education system, whether it's our schools, whether it's our housing. Because reconciliation ultimately isn't just about bringing together people who are enemies, it is also about bringing together people who are different and allowing them to know each other and understand each other better. And I believe the best way to do that is to give our communities the confidence and the freedom to be able to be more than two traditions, to be able to look at their multi-layered identity. I'm British, I'm Irish, I'm from Belfast, I'm a European, and I'm proud of all those things. They're not in conflict in me. They shouldn't need to be in conflict in this place I call home.
Thank you. If Mary Lou and Colm get their way and there is some sort of vote just between ourselves, how would you vote?
Well, I go back to my engineering roots.
Come on,
I'm an
answer the question.
evidence-based politician.
Okay.
And so I will make my decision, my personal decision, based on the evidence at the time and what I believe based on that evidence is best for the people of Northern Ireland. And that's how I will make the decision. I'm not driven by ideology on this question. My ideology is about building a shared and better future for the people who live in Northern Ireland. So my ideology isn't about the United Kingdom or United Ireland. My ideology is about driving forward that project, because whatever our future holds, we are in it together. And Martin Luther King said we can either learn to live together as brothers or we will perish together as fools. And never have truer words been spoken when it comes to Northern Ireland. We need to learn to live together as brothers, as family. And families do not always get on. They do not always see eye to eye, but they get through, and that's what we need to focus on. So I'm sorry that that possibly wasn't the answer you were looking for, Mark.
I've got one more.
It's maybe not the big splash in the news tonight, but there you go.
Oh, no, I got a headline.
Exactly.
I've got a cheap headline.
But,
you say you base it on the evidence. Say it's tomorrow. What's the evidence at the moment then?
It's a fair question. Actually, we don't have a proposition. And if there's one thing Brexit has taught me, is we should not have referenda without having a formal proposition that people can scrutinise. So what I will do with Emma and with Doug and with Mary Lou and with Colin is I will work with them to look at what that proposition might be, to look at how things might work, because there are huge unanswered questions. And when we have a proposition that we can balance against the status quo, then I think that's a good time for us to be able to make a decision. But I don't want to be driven into the kind of leap of faith politics that we ended up with Brexit, because that has not worked out well.
And just to be clear, nobody is suggesting that. Just so we don't have anybody leaving this hall with any false number. Nobody
Except
is suggesting
Mark wants it tomorrow.
Brexit. Don't mind Mark. Brexit, Mark, to our leap. What we are saying, a lot of us are saying now we need the structured conversation. We need a citizens' assembly, because we need to exactly work towards what you've described.
And we want to be part of that conversation, because regardless of the outcome, this is my home. Exactly. It is the home for the people who I represent. And it is the home for Emma and for Doug and for everybody, whether a United Ireland is something they want, or whether it's something they're indifferent to, or whether it's something that they don't want. It will still be their home, and we have to learn to accommodate each other in Northern Ireland, and then we can go on and accommodate each other in wider agreements.
I've just been told this has to be the last question, so Emma, it's not been easy for you. You've been slightly outnumbered, but you get to have the last word.
Well, I do want to end on a hopeful note around the next 25 years, because despite the difficulties we face at the minute, I remain incredibly hopeful for this place. I believe we can do it, and we can only do it by working together. Yes, it's fractured at the minute. It's broken. And we all, regardless of whether we admit it or not, many of us have some part to play in terms of breaking that. But we can have a very, very positive role to play in fixing it. And I think progress has been made. There is a pathway. And I think, certainly from my point of view, I'm hugely positive that by working together constructively, we can build that brighter, better future for everyone. The only way this place is going to work is by acknowledging each other through inclusion, but also in terms of our east-west, north-south relationships. That is what has been fractured. We've had a very difficult number of years, but my plea and my commitment is that we are going to engage constructively and positively to fix. There's a unique opportunity. It's broken, let's fix it, but let's get it right, and let's get the foundations right to make sure there's stability for the next 25 years. Certainly, I believe we can do that.
Thank you very much indeed. Folks, can you just indulge me for the last minute as a former student of Queen's University to thank the university for everything they've done this week. They've done two things that didn't happen on Good Friday. They've brought all of the parties under the same roof, which didn't happen on Good Friday, and they've brought the journalists inside rather than outside in the snow. So thank you to everyone at Queen's, and thank you most of all to our panel. Thank you.
Many thanks. Nothing like a lively panel to get the day started. So now I want to move on, and I'm going to call on Jamie Lucas Campbell, a postgraduate student officer in Queen's Students' Union, to introduce our next speaker.
Good morning, everyone. Good morning. If you can't tell from my accent, I'm a New Yorker who has made Belfast my home nearly 2 years ago to pursue a master's degree here at Queen's. I'm honored to be here. And most importantly, as an aspiring PhD candidate who hopes to commence doctoral studies here later this year, I will say that Queens has helped make Belfast my home, and it's people like Nick Rybionski, Jack Taggart, Pierce McGee, Maria Lee, and so many others who make this place a beacon of impact for all of us. It's people like those that I just mentioned that make this university the place I want to call my home for another 3 to 3.5 years. And apologies to Ambassador Hartley, who has undoubtedly heard how much I've been raving about my experiences to her team over these past 2 weeks ahead of the presidential visit. Everyone, please welcome one of my favorite diplomats, my ambassador, Jane Hartley.
I'm debating whether to use the step or not. I think that might be too tall. What do you think? I'm always paranoid because I come from a family where everybody's 6'4" except for me. But I think this will do. So I heard a comment that you've seen many former and current American presidents lately. I think you have, and now you have an American ambassador. So I hope you're not sick of us yet. Anyway, thank you. It's wonderful to be here. And before I say anything else, let's give a round of applause for Jamie Lucas. He's an inspiring example of how our two people are connected. An American student excelling here in Belfast, committed to making his community a better place, wherever that community is. He is also a reminder of the international benefits of peace. 25 years ago, not many young people were traveling to Belfast for their studies. Peace has opened the door of possibility for so many young people, most importantly, for the young people of Northern Ireland. When I arrived in Belfast on my first official visit a few months ago, I came here to Queen's University, where I spoke with many of you about your ambitions for your future. And it was clear from those conversations that they are very much the same as ours, the same as mine. It's the hope that you can pass on more opportunity to your children, and that they can pass on more opportunity to theirs. And sometimes we call that the American dream, but it's really a universal dream, shared by families from Belfast, Northern Ireland, to Belfast, Maine. Faith in that simple dream is what unites us, and it gives meaning and urgency to our efforts to protect a hard-won peace. And I saw that urgency in the eyes of young leaders I met here who were born in Northern Ireland, and though they studied or worked abroad, decided they really wanted to come back home because they really wanted to live their lives here. And they wanted to make their neighborhoods, their communities, their families stronger. And I saw that urgency here at Queen's University, where you're partnering with local businesses and tech companies to create job pipelines for students in Northern Ireland. And here also a big shout out to Hillary Clinton, who's doing some amazing things here, and for her Clinton scholarships. But I also saw communities that still needed to be lifted up. Places where people were eager to work, wanted to contribute, but where investment, where opportunity was scarce. So 25 years on from the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, we do have much to celebrate. A once fragile peace has held, and it's held strong, giving hope and opportunity to a generation of young people who grew up free from the violence and the despair of the Troubles. We owe a tremendous debt to the people who risked their lives and livelihoods to achieve that landmark agreement. The people who, as President Biden said, walked brave steps so that their children might have a better future. People like Prime Minister Blair, President Clinton, John Hume, David Trimble, the amazing George Mitchell, John Major, and so many other brave, brave individuals. And people in this room today, like Ambassador Reese, Mary Robinson, and Congressman Neal. And also just regular people who had the courage, the bravery, the compassion in their hearts as they buried animosities that had built up for centuries. The Belfast Good Friday Agreement remains a stunning achievement to this day and the foundation of Northern Ireland's progress in the years since. But our task today is not to look backward. Our task is to look forward and determine how to make progress where progress still needs to be made. So this week, as we celebrate the enduring success of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, let us dedicate ourselves to recapturing its spirit of renewal, its spirit of compromise, the focus on creating more opportunity for the next generation. As many of you know, the United States is the single largest source of foreign direct investment into Northern Ireland. More than 200 companies employ more than 30,000 people. So my feeling is, let's build on that. Let's show the world what Northern Ireland has to offer in terms of resources, in terms of creativity, in terms of talent. Let's create more links between universities and the private sector, like Queen's University is currently doing. We need that spirit of renewal right now. We need to get back to governing, and Northern Ireland needs to get back to governing and growing, because economic progress depends on political stability. And in my view, the Windsor Framework gives everyone a roadmap toward a more prosperous future. So the task now is for all parties to walk a few more brave steps and get back to the hard work of government. Because democracy, however messy, however imperfect, remains the best way for Northern Ireland to decide its own destiny. To paraphrase President Clinton, who is here, and I heard him speak last night, and just a wonderful speech, he and George Mitchell and everybody there, what they put into, and the bravery and the courage, what they did 25 years ago. But anyway, to paraphrase President Clinton, the difficulties of sharing power are nothing compared to the difficulties of having no power at all to shape your future. So earlier this morning, we had a panel of local elected leaders here, wonderful conversation, and I think they took some brave steps in that panel. And I hope we can see scenes like that very soon happening again, discussions, conversations at Stormont. Because the truth is, everyone here wants to make the next 25 years of Northern Ireland about prosperity, and just as the first 25 years were about peace. And I personally believe they will be. And you heard it from the President of the United States last week. I was honored to be here with him. America believes in Northern Ireland. We believe in you. We are committed to your progress. We have faith in the peace that you have built, and we believe there is no turning back. Our challenge now, a challenge we welcome, is to lift everyone in Northern Ireland up equally and pass more opportunity on to the next generation. Reflecting on the 20th anniversary of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, the amazing George Mitchell said that the real credit belonged to the people, always to the people, and to the political leaders of Northern Ireland who in dangerous and difficult circumstances, after entire lifetimes in conflict with one another, summoned extraordinary vision and an extraordinary courage. So now, I would say to all of you, it is our time. It is your time. Your time to summon that extraordinary courage and vision, to meet the challenges we face, to seize the opportunities before us, and to build on the kind of future for Northern Ireland that its young people truly deserve. Thank you very much. I look forward to working with you.
Now, a big thank you to Jamie Lucas Campbell and to our keynote speaker ambassador, Jane Hartley. We now move on to our panel discussion for this morning, the Good Friday Agreement, a template for resolving global conflict. We have a fantastic panel lined up for you, and we'll meet them in a moment. Our chair for this panel is Ambassador Mitchell B. Rees, former US Special Envoy for the Northern Ireland peace process. The chair will be joined by Dr. Mary Robinson, former President of Ireland, and the former United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, Congressman Richard E. Neal, ranking member of the US House of Representatives Ways and Means Committee, Dr. Amanda Sloat, Special Assistant to the US President and Senior Director for Europe on the National Security Council, and Maros Sefcovic, European Commission Vice President for Interinstitutional Relations and Foresight. Please join me in welcoming them to the stage.
Thank you. There's going to be a prompt. Where they go? There's prompts. Why don't we get started? Good morning. My name is Mitchell Rees, and it is a great pleasure and privilege to be moderating this second panel today. It is especially a great pleasure to be able to share the dais with such a distinguished group of public officials. To my right, to your left, is Dr. Mary Robinson, who needs no introduction to this audience whatsoever. To my immediate right is the Honorable Richie Neal, the Congressman from Massachusetts, my native state. Congressman. To my far left is Vice President of the European Commission, Mr. Sefcovic. Welcome. And to my immediate left is Dr. Amanda Sloat, the Special Assistant to the United States President and Senior Director for Europe at the National Security Council. So this morning we were all treated to a very detailed discussion of some of the constitutional, political, cultural, and identity issues facing Northern Ireland. For this session, we want to open the aperture a little bit and look at the meaning of the Good Friday Agreement beyond Northern Ireland. Can it serve as a template, as an example, as a model for other conflicts, and particularly for conflict resolution in other parts of the world? And so the first question is my asking each of the panelists, what are the lesson or lessons that you can draw from the Good Friday Agreement and the subsequent 25 years, and that you think have applicability to conflicts around the world? So let me start with you, Dr. Robinson, please.
Thank you. Well, it's been wonderful to be here and to hear some great reflections on the Good Friday, the Belfast Good Friday Agreement. I was president from 1990 to September 1997. And during that time, of course, I tried outside the political with groups of women, with cross-community groups, etc., to encourage and visits to Northern Ireland, including to West Belfast, at a time when neither the British nor the Irish government really wanted me to go, but I knew it was important, and I never regretted it. But in September 1997, I, on the one day, ceased to be President of Ireland and, under pressure from Kofi Annan, became the UN High Commissioner for Human Rights. Extremely stupid. I didn't take a holiday. I mean, it was crazy. But I then went to my new post as UN High Commissioner for Human Rights, and during 1998, I was promoting the 50th anniversary of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And I actually came back to Belfast in December 1998. And I was helped greatly in visiting again and making a speech here by my great friends Agnes McCormack, sadly deceased, and Martin O'Brien, who's also been looking after me here today. And Martin very kindly found the speech I gave. And I hate quoting my own speeches, but there are just two passages that I think are highly kind of relevant. I was speaking as High Commissioner, and I said, having talked about the Universal Declaration, I said, all of this is reflected in the Good Friday Agreement, which is conspicuous by the centrality it gives to equality and human rights concerns. Few documents emerging from divisive and difficult political negotiations have so well captured the importance of fairness and in creating a right relationship. And then I go on, if I may, just for 1 second. Your job in the future, if change is to be embedded, is to ensure that the various institutions that emerge from the agreement adhere to the human rights standards set for them. My job is to do the same thing from the international level. And then I go on, one more quote. I also see my role as ensuring that the international community learns from your experience so that the change initiated here can begin to transform the relationships elsewhere, and so transform the lives of so many far from here by making good on the promises of the Universal Declaration of Human Rights. And my bluff was actually called on all of this when, in 2013, I got a different mandate from a different Secretary General of the UN. I was invited to be the first woman in a senior mediation in the Great Lakes in Africa. And it was under an agreement called the Pact for Peace, Security and Development in the Great Lakes in Africa and the Democratic Republic of Congo. And I can come back to how difficult I found it, but I was trying to implement what the Good Friday Agreement stood for. But maybe you should hear other panelists first, and maybe I'll get a chance to tell you my story. But,
thank you.
So the first thing I hope for, Madam President, is that nobody will quote some of the speeches I've made over the years.
I've never done that before.
So I want to thank Queen's University, a reputation of international renown, for the forum that they've presented and the opportunity for all of us to reflect upon what has been an immensely successful part of American foreign policy, the Good Friday Agreement. There's a danger in anecdotes in politics, but there's also evidence that frequently comes of it in these small conversations. And just this morning, coming down from breakfast on the elevator, a woman introduced herself to me. She had recognized me, and she said, I grew up in County Down. She said, my childhood was based upon fear. She said, we couldn't travel, we couldn't go wherever we wanted to go because we were worried about our own security. And then she said to me something that was very powerful. She said, I wish my grandparents could come back for 1 hour to see the success of what happened. American foreign policy is always a manifestation of domestic policy, and it means in a representative democracy, people within that democracy have a chance to influence international events. The Friends of Ireland was born because of the violence here in the North. And the Friends of Ireland served as an honest broker, including a current president, members of Congress, and we insisted that there be a change in policy by the United States where actually we would immerse ourselves in the details of the longest-standing political conflict in the history of the world. Reminder, 30 years ago, there were 30,000 British soldiers in an area the size of our state of Connecticut. I was here. 106 military installations. You couldn't travel anywhere in Belfast or Derry without the threat of being stopped and frisked. And on a congressional delegation visit here in 1989 with the Speaker of the House, Tom Foley, our bus was stopped at the Donegal-Derry border with the Speaker of the House on the bus and searched by British military. Today, if you cross what was the border, your phone pings. That's the reality of what the American dimension as an honest broker helped to bring about. The other substantive part of this acknowledgement in an academic setting, which is really important, the world was changing in the mid-'80s, really changing. The Soviet Union collapsed, and despite the punitive actions of Putin today, Eastern Europe remains free. Part of that was the American guarantee. Majoritarian government had come to South Africa, and democracy appeared to be on the march in places like Central America and South America. There were free elections. You might not like the result of a free election, but there were free elections. And there was one stubborn issue in the 6 counties of Northern Ireland, where decent people every day tried to get on with their lives. But the fact was that ancient tribal considerations frequently got in the way. Bill Clinton decided to put something into it with Hillary Clinton. And I must tell you, the Friends of Ireland lobbied him hard, aggressively, and the meetings weren't always pleasant. And when he chose George Mitchell, a lifelong friend, the demeanor of George Mitchell speaks to everything. He never, through that process, used excitable language. Albert Reynolds, Bertie, Tony Blair, everybody decided, at great risk, by the way, and how about to the political parties and the leaders, not just the political risks here, the personal risks. You know, one of the hardest things to do in politics, and it needs to be recognized, is to say to your most ardent, fervent believers and supporters, we're not going to get what we want today. But the success of the Good Friday Agreement was because everybody had to give up something to get to the accord. And these institutions need to be up and running, and the government stood up as a result of everything that America, the UK, and the Irish government have put into it. You can't have an election and just have people say, we're not going to abide by the result of the election. There are many elections in America where I don't like the outcome, but I accept what happened. So concessions, compromise, and consent, convincing people of a new path. That's what the experience of the Good Friday Agreement has meant. And woe be to he or she who makes the argument you can move away from the Good Friday Agreement. America, as you've heard for the last 3 days, we, as a co-guarantor of that agreement, we are all in.
Well, first and foremost, I really would like to thank the Queen's University Belfast for hosting me already for the second time, because I was here in September 2021 because I just wanted to continue this very intensive interaction we had with all political leaders in Northern Ireland, but also with civic society. I think the Professor Kathy Hayward is doing a marvelous job in working with the communities, in putting it into, I would say, the metrics, how the opinion polls are evolving in Northern Ireland. And of course, we've been listening very, very carefully to all the representatives of the business community here in Northern Ireland, what is needed. What I heard very clearly was we need predictability, we need stability, we need the vision of peace, and we need the vision of prosperity. And therefore, if you ask me what are the lessons to be learned from Good Friday Belfast Agreement, I think first and foremost, for me, it would be the inclusivity, that you have to listen carefully to all actors, and therefore we've been very clear from the outset that we want to work together with our UK partners and with all actors in Northern Ireland to deliver something which would work well for all communities, because it has to be the joint effort. And I think if I look back in 1998, it was my first day when I started as ambassador of Slovakia to Israel. But I can tell you, I was glued to the TV screen because I was watching the final days of the negotiations on the Good Friday Belfast Agreement to see the vision, to see the hope which was created by this deliberation. The people celebrating in the streets that the peace has come to the streets of Belfast and other cities in Northern Ireland and across the whole island of Ireland. And I think that you need also to build the positive emotion around the negotiations, which I think was so well translated into huge political support for the agreement. Because if you look at the referendum results, 71% or more than 90% of support, that's remarkable. That's you have a societal consensus that we want to move on. We want to usher the new era, and we want to focus not only on peace, but also on increased prosperity. And I'm very happy that this afternoon with Tony Starr, but also with Secretary Chris Heaton-Harris, but also with the U.S. envoy for Northern Ireland, Mr. Kennedy, we'll be also discussing, this perspective of this new economic prosperity for Northern Ireland, because I think that after 25 years of peace, now we need to focus how we can combine the peace with increased prosperity for the Northern Ireland, and I think it's achievable. We saw very democratic dynamics in our previous panels, so I think the democracy is live and healthy in Northern Ireland, so it's up to the people of Northern Ireland how they decide to move it forward. But I think that the discussions like we have today organized by the university, the interaction, and kind of highlighting what kind of opportunities this new situation brings to the island of Ireland will be the markers which I think will resonate with all political leaders in Northern Ireland.
Thank you. Dr. Sloat.
Thank you. Having sat in the audience yesterday and listened to so many giants of the peace process speak, it's a real honor to be sitting up here today. When the Good Friday Agreement was signed, I was in the midst of my PhD at the University of Edinburgh in Scotland, and I moved to Belfast at the beginning of September 2001, so just 3 years after the agreement was signed. And there was peace, but it was a fragile peace. Holy Cross was kicking off. It made international news, including in the US, making my parents and friends very concerned about my decision to move to Northern Ireland. Just over a week after I got here, 9/11 happened. Nobody ever again asked if I felt safe living in Belfast. And people spoke a lot yesterday about the empathy and the compassion of the people in Northern Ireland, And I have to say, if I could not be in my own country on such a terrible day, it was really profound to be in a place like Northern Ireland where people knew firsthand what terrorism and what living through those types of experiences was like. My boss here at Queen's University was Elizabeth Meehan, who we lost several years ago, and I know would have fully appreciated the events this week. She invited me over to her house. She told me to call my friends and family. She ordered curry, and we sat there on her couch and over again watched those terrible images from that day. And then as I was getting ready to go home, she gave me a nightgown and told me to spend the night. So felt fully embraced by her and by the people here. That Friday, there was a memorial service outside City Hall, and I see Barbara Stevenson in the audience, who was the newly arrived Consul General then, and she stood on the stage flanked by political leaders and religious leaders from both communities and said to them, the thing you can do to most help us is to find peace amongst yourselves. And so it's somewhat of the inverse of the question on this panel, but it was an interesting example of how a terrible tragedy in the United States ended up being yet another impetus to the peace process here. The morning of 9/11, I know Jerry Adams was in Dublin meeting with Richard Haas, who was President Bush's envoy to Northern Ireland, talking about some engagement that the IRA had been having with the FARC in Colombia. And I think the experience of Colombia and also the way in which the terrorist attacks in the United States resonated with the American people, the way it shaped how they looked at terrorism, including here in Northern Ireland, led to an announcement 6 weeks later by the IRA to start the decommissioning process. Several weeks after that, the PSNI was stood up, and my flatmate, who was a young Catholic woman who had just graduated from Queen's University and been very cagey with me when I moved in about what her career plans were, told me that she was in the first class of Catholic recruits to join the PSNI. And so I saw firsthand through her experiences the reality of what policing in Northern Ireland was like. I worked as a special advisor to the Committee of Finance and Personnel, which, when you want to talk about the mundane business that Stormont was doing, was looking at the types of EU funding that the Assembly was getting. I had a friend who worked for the Northern Ireland Women's Coalition, and so went out with Monica McWilliams and others and knocked doors. I worked as a poll clerk at one of the elections here, and really saw firsthand on a day-to-day basis what brave people in Northern Ireland were doing to preserve and to implement the peace. And I'd mentioned Colombia briefly, and it was one of those places years later that really ended up looking to Northern Ireland as a model. And when I left Northern Ireland and moved back to the US in 2005, worked for the National Democratic Institute, which also took a number of political leaders from different countries, including Iraq, where I worked after I left Northern Ireland, here to show people an example of a multi-sectarian, multi-faith, divided society that was able to implement and develop structures to find a way forward toward peace.
Thank you. So I listened very carefully to what all the panelists said. From Dr. Robinson, it was respect for human rights and equality. From the congressman, it was the importance of the role of the United States and the crucial variable of leadership, making a huge difference. From Maros, it was inclusivity and having a vision that people can unite around and become inclusive. And Amanda's clear sense of empathy that came through, along with a detailed knowledge of the local landscape. All of those, I think, clearly were part of what made the Good Friday Agreement such a success, and perhaps transcend it and have lessons for other conflicts around the world. But here we are in the heart of a great university, one of the best in the entire world, and there are probably young people here in the room and perhaps watching around the world. And so perhaps we can offer some lessons for them as the future negotiators of conflict resolution, of peace agreements. What are some of the qualities that you feel that you need to bring to the table when you're negotiating these intractable problems with very difficult people. If the problems were easy, they would have been solved by the time you got there. So what are the personal qualifications or characteristics that you think are most useful in negotiating peace agreements? Dr. Robinson.
Well, thank you. I thought I might illustrate with my personal experience in being asked to mediate on that Pact for Peace, Stability and Development in the Great Lakes in Africa and the Democratic Republic of Congo. That was the title. I tried to reframe it as a pact of hope, and I wanted to involve civil society, and in particular women. It was very difficult. I learned a lot from listening to the panel discussions at this conference, and one thing that I absolutely agree with was the emphasis on the need to nurture implementation of an agreement. So you get the words on paper, you get the vision, the Good Friday Belfast Agreement, but you need to really reinforce and fulfill the objectives. So I had 13 heads of state of countries of Africa. I had 4 institutions, the United Nations, the African Union, the Great Lakes organization itself, and SADC from Southern Africa, all represented at head of state level. They were all, pretty well all men. There was one woman, Joyce Banda, was head of SADC for a while. There was a secretariat formed, nominated by these heads of state. They all nominated men. I got Binta Diop, who was a great friend of mine. She was the special representative of the African Commission on Women, Peace and Security to join. I nominated her. I didn't have a right to nominate, but I nominated, and so she was one. When I was in places like Goma and meeting with civil society, I realized that in the culture, very often women wouldn't speak up. So there were times when I literally, because I was short of time myself, I would say, look, this has been very good. I'm glad to have heard you. Now I want to listen to the women. So men, get out. Let me talk to the women. And then I would hear, you know, the serial rape that was going on, the terrible violence against women, which would never be spoken about unless you get the group together, etc. I eventually ended up supporting and forming a platform of women's groups from the 4 key countries, from the DRC, from Rwanda, from Uganda, and from Burundi. And that's still going, I'm glad to say. And I follow a little bit. Things are bad again in the DRC. You just don't, you don't easily make and sustain peace. If only we understood how precious the Good Friday Belfast Agreement is, and that it has lasted, as has been emphasized, that there is a process here for the people of Northern Ireland which is beyond price. It's invaluable. It's rare. It's very rare at the international level, as I know from my work as UN High Commissioner for Human Rights and now as Chair of the Elders, where we're still trying to address some conflicts. So, it's wonderful to be here. I hope that this commemoration that has been so well planned by Queen's University, and I pay great tribute to the planning of it, will help encourage valuing and now implementing fully this very special Good Friday Belfast Agreement.
Thank you.
I think one of the most difficult things in negotiating significant legislation is to know how far your opponents can go, and then to give them some room to bring back the information to their supporters, and then try to push to get a little bit more, but to listen very carefully, but to always acknowledge the realities of where we find ourselves. Example, the 3 strands of the Good Friday Agreement, North, South, East, West, and British Isles. The 3 strands of the Good Friday Agreement, there were 2 seismic moments in the negotiation. One, when the Republic of Ireland gave up its constitutional argument for Articles 2 and 3 of the Constitution that laid claim to the 6 counties. And the UK gave up the border. Now, with Brexit, some began to argue that, well, maybe there could be a return to a hard border. I want to say this, based on what Joe Biden, Nancy Pelosi, and I have said repeatedly. There can be no return to a hard border on the island of Ireland. The significance of being able to journey back and forth from Belfast to Dublin, which is strand 2 of the agreement, has changed everything for young people and their aspirations. 2 generations have now grown up here, not knowing of the violence. And I return to the phrase that I offered early on, the risks that people took to bring about those 2 big achievements. And when we think of it, it becomes a template for the rest of the world. But at the same time, when we reach our potential expands.
Thank you. Maros, you've been involved in some interesting negotiations recently. What lessons might you share with us?
I think, I mean, for the young people, I would say the message would be that diplomacy, or I would say negotiations in the politics, it's not easy. As my mom says, if it would be easy, everyone else would do it. So, I mean, it's really a challenging task. But you have enormous sense of accomplishment and delivering the public service if you succeed. And it's something which, I mean, kind of keeps you motivating because you know that you are trying to do the good thing and to find the best possible solution for all the parties. I would say that lesson number 1 is respect your partner. Know your file. Go into the details, because that would allow you to kind of understand better what are the limitations of your partners. Work with your partners, but also work with your own constituency, because in the end you will have to find the solution, which might be kind of difficult also for your own party, and therefore sometimes the change of the mindset, the new approach to solving the problems, being creative, I think it's very, very important. So you have to kind of work on both sides with your negotiating partners, but also with the party you represent or you're trying to convince about the solutions you are working on. And I think that respect should be demonstrated in the room and outside of the room, because you need to be very honest with your partners, but also to be, I would say, very, very honest and positive about them when we are talking to the press, when we are talking to other parties, because the world is actually very, very small. And I mean, it's very difficult to trust your partner negotiator when you know that there is this lack of respect. So I think it's a big part of that is, I would say, also the establishment of this strong personal relationship. I'm so happy that with both James Cleverly, Chris Heaton-Harris, in a very short period of time, we managed to have that strong relationship. I always remember the very positive atmosphere we had on the Hill with the Congressman Richie Neal, but also with the other caucus, the support of U.S. administration, and of course, a big support among the member states in the European Union. In the end, I think we've been all very proud. The European Union was at the side of the peace process in Northern Ireland from the day one. From the first announcement of the ceasefire, it was still Jacques Delors who asked, how can we help? What can we do? And I think that through all the peace programs and the facilities and financing, just to be a good friend, not to meddle in, but to be always ready to assist and help. I have seen fantastic projects from Schenkel Road Women's Center, community schooling, Peace Bridge, Fleury Bridge, you know, area being transformed from military ground into the thriving business community. And all these are, I would say, very practical things which kind of demonstrate to the people of Northern Ireland that there is very strong peace dividend. And there is more to come if you work in that direction. Coming back to my initial arguments, I have such a personal, I would say, rule for myself that, because sometimes, of course, these discussions could be very frustrating. I'm sure that Madam President and Richie would confirm. Sometimes there is a disappointment, sometimes there is a failure, but always try to have the evening conclusion of the conversation in a way that you can have a coffee in the morning with your partner. Never break it off, never push it beyond the state of repair, because in the end, it's always up to you to come back to the deal, to come back to the table, and work harder for finding the solution. And for that, you need to have that utmost respect for your partner. You need to build a strong personal relationship, and you have to build that relationship of trust, which is, I think, such a crucial quality for any successful negotiations.
Thank you, Mark.
Amanda.
I think everybody has hit on many of the key themes. The one message I would give to the students here, especially the women students here, is please go into government. I know there is more money to be made in finance. There is more money to be made in tech. Politics and government don't always get the best reputation, but we need a new generation of leaders to bring a new perspective and a new energy. And I think you have to follow your passion in what you're doing. I never expected over 20 years ago when I was sitting here that I would be returning one day with the President of the United States. But had a passion for European politics, was deeply interested in what was happening here, and it's always good if what you study in university becomes relevant at a later point in your life. In terms of approach to negotiations, the fellow panelists have hit on many of them, and there was clear themes that were coming out of yesterday. One obviously is the importance of including women. And it was discussed in the women's lunch yesterday, and I can't remember what the actual statistic was, but it was looking at the greater longevity of peace agreements that are concluded with the involvement of women. Second, George Mitchell spoke incredibly eloquently yesterday about the importance of listening, and I think just having the opportunity to hear people and deeply understand what it is they're saying. Third, everybody has focused as well on the importance of implementation, and I think the reality that sometimes institutions and systems are designed to stop a conflict, and then things evolve, and things need to evolve with them over time. And the final piece, I think, is the importance of the economic aspect. You're seeing this in societies with the need to ensure young people are fully employed, that people have hope, that people have a perspective on the future. And I think it really was the message that the President was wanting to deliver when he was here last week, that the last 25 years have been about the peace, the importance of ensuring the next 25 years are about the prosperity, and taking full advantage of the peace dividend that has been put in place here, and ensuring that we can capitalize on it to the benefit of everyone in Northern Ireland.
Thank you. Thank you. So one of the common themes from all of our panelists is really the importance of communication, both communicating and receiving communications and understanding what that means. Now, we all know that social media didn't exist 25 years ago, but I'm curious what you think, how has social media today impacted negotiations, both in terms of the trust that Maros was talking about, in terms of understanding the opponent's view, in terms of communicating to your own constituency, and in terms of other voices, other stakeholders, perhaps aggravating, increasing the difficulty, putting more pressure in real time on negotiations. Because that's a reality that we all face today. It's something that you can't pretend doesn't exist. It's part of the variables that make up any negotiation today, and you have to be able to handle it. So, Dr. Robinson, how do you evaluate that today, and what advice would you give?
No, it's certainly true. I had to actually travel on one day and meet 5 presidents of Africa on a tricky situation. And I'll tell you a funny story briefly. My office was in Nairobi. I'd been and seen President Kikwete in Tanzania. I was going on to President Kagame in Rwanda, and I was staying in Nairobi, and I came to the VIP early in the morning, and the plane taxied down the runway, and phone calls had to be made, and the plane came back for me, an Air Kenya flight. I'll never forget it. It's the only time that could ever have happened. There's a lot of pressure. But I think that it's very important to try to understand what is the fear and resistance to an agreement more. And rather than, put pressure of the wrong kind, help those who are fearful to overcome through, and I think this conference hopefully helped. I would have liked to have seen more representation, for example, the DUP here. I thought the panel this morning was very good because it showed the different perspectives. And it did show, you know, that there are still fears, that there are still worries. I think we have to be terribly, you know, kind of reach out as much as possible in order to secure for the whole people of Northern Ireland the full flowering of this agreement. It is ready to flower. There's no doubt about that. I think the Windsor framework was very helpful in, you know, sorting out a lot of knotty issues. It's clear there is goodwill from the United States and money behind that goodwill. There is huge support from the European Union. Northern Ireland is very lucky. I mean, you know, for a relatively small population to have these connections and to have this support. I can think of Yemen, I can think of what's happening to women now in Afghanistan, I can think of all kinds of places that aren't getting the support. And I just wanted to reinforce one point that you made about the role of women in peace processes. I see Milan Verveer down there in the audience with her incredible Institute for Women, Peace and Security, and how helpful you were to me in my work. And we had a great meeting recently with Monica McWilliams and all of us over there, and I think this has helped to highlight the importance of women. But it's more than that. We have to build in now the role that women play on the ground and make it part of peace processes and make it part of the implementation and have them at the table. We just have to do that more. It's still not happening enough.
Thank you.
So I'm glad that we would not be trying to negotiate the Good Friday Agreement in the age of social media. You sit in a room now in Washington where you're sworn to secrecy and confidence building, and as you walk out the door, reporters and others have knowledge of what you've just said and done. Our job is not to entertain the voters. Our job is to inform the voters. And I call attention to that because in complicated negotiations, the reward more and more seems to be how do you stop something from happening rather than having it happen. And the critics know just where to put the needle in with excitable language. They know the media outlet that you go to that's going to confirm what you think rather than the opposite. And social media creates instant opinion. Yeah. How many times in our own lives have we believed something only 6 months later to say, how could I have believed that? Upon reflection. And I think that it plagues the Western democracies now. Disinformation, which is carefully calculated, versus misinformation, which can suggest that somebody's just misinformed. But it's harder and harder in the Western democracies now to get big things done. And the other part of it is back to what happened with the Good Friday Agreement, the compromises that were built in. Compromise is not akin to treason. Compromise means that even though in this moment we can't get what we want, if we're patient enough, if we use the process of democratic institutions, we can prevail over a prescribed period of time. But social media, Mitchell, has really plagued our ability in Washington to get big things done.
So we are outraged immediately, and we understand at our leisure.
Well, it's also, as I said a moment ago, what's happened to media, it's called confirmation bias. You go to the media outlet that agrees with you. And rather than a discerning media, because it's harder with the world of social media to do context. You know, columnists and others used to explain things as to why you did what you did.
It's hard to do that in a tweet.
It's really hard to do that in a tweet, which engulfs raw emotion at that moment.
Yeah. Right. Solution?
Well, I mean, my own prescription is that I think the voters should reward those who have the great patience of understanding that in democratic institutions, you sit sometimes in a room, as I did with USMCA, the largest trade agreement in the history of the world, And day after day, when people said you can't get an agreement, not only did we get an agreement, 195 Democrats voted for a trade agreement, and 194 Republicans voted for the trade agreement. You sit there and you say to yourself, I can't believe what they just said, but you don't say that publicly. And you say, if they say that again, I'm going to get up and leave, and then what? You sit down. You don't get up and leave. But I think that the patience wears thin now because of social media. And again, the reward politically in the Western democracies now seems to be leaning against achievement.
And the fundraising aspect of it, where the social media being used to generate donations.
What you have to do is you have to generate conflict 24 hours a day and outrage. And it becomes harder and harder if you're a serious legislator when you're responding to information that is nonsense, never mind misinformed.
I think my lessons from negotiations and, of course, this huge social media presence, which is inevitable, it will always be like this. I think that the communication part of the negotiation process is becoming as important as the negotiation themselves. So coming back to that trust among the negotiators must be built also on the fact that we are going to communicate more or less along the same lines. If there is any, let's say, communication crisis, that we will talk to each other, that our communication advisors would be on top of it, that we are not going to entertain the public, as a congressman said, that we are not going to provide the kind of running commentary on the issue, and that we have to focus our minds on what is our job. It's to get an agreement, it's to find a solution, it's to bring the resolution to the issue we have on the table. And to that, we have to also adjust our communication policy. So communication discipline, trust, I would say, certain attempt to create through, I would say, confidentiality of the discussion, the negotiation space for everyone who is involved. I think it's crucially important. Otherwise, it's becoming very difficult, because especially if you are in the situation, and all these important negotiations are politically very, very sensitive. And immediately, if you kind of generate the pushbacks, the political clash, or create, I would say, very difficult political noise, that's extremely complicated to focus on the substance of the problem you have to resolve. So I think that from now on, for all future negotiators of the difficult, sensitive deals, they have to have very strong communication advisors, and the communication policy has to be part of the negotiations, because that's the only way how we can handle these difficult negotiations.
Thank you. Thank you. Amanda, working at the White House, very sensitive place, lots of social media, lots of opinions.
Yes, as Congressman said, lots of opinions in Washington. I had the same initial reaction as him, which it's difficult to imagine the Good Friday agreement being negotiated now. I mean, you could imagine sort of negotiators walking out and tweeting, and somebody taking photographs of working documents and things getting tweeted out. Although, that said, I give a tremendous amount of credit to the EU and the UK, which managed to negotiate the Windsor Framework in a very closed and quiet way, which does show, if you have people on both sides committed to serious good faith negotiations, even in this time of social media, it is possible to keep things private, to block out the outside noise, and to get things done. At its best, social media can be an effective tool for government. It can be a way to get out information, to reach people that you might not otherwise, to present information in new and creative ways. And again, I think this is another reason why we need the next generation of leaders who will help us harness, hopefully, a lot of this new technology in ways that it can ultimately be used for productive purposes rather than in harmful ones.
Great. Thank you. Thank you. So our session is coming to a close. I want to thank Queen's University again. I want to thank all of you, and I especially want to thank my distinguished panelists for, I hope, what was a very informative and interesting conversation. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Thank you. That was terrific.
We thank you for your answers. No, I'm glad you said that stuff.
Thank you, panel. Great panel. Amazing to hear how the Good Friday Agreement is being used as a template for resolving conflict all over the world. We're now going to rearrange the stage to get set up for our next session, the live recording of the Rest is Politics podcast. So please bear with us. Some other housekeeping notes. This afternoon we look forward to the Mitchell Institute panels and the Cancer Showcase event. Could the speakers for those events please make their way to the back of the hall now, and staff will escort you to lunch. Likewise, the delegates who are attending the honorary graduation, if they could also move to the back of the hall for that event. And we'll be back in a few minutes.